July 1940. The Second World War started 10 months ago. Germany occupied half Poland, Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, Belgium, and France. In the British sky, there is a battle between Royal Air Force and Luftwaffe. Italians and British are fighting in Africa. USA is neutral. After the defeat of France, in Europe there is a stalemate. Axis has not the navy to invade Britain. British Empire has not the power to defeat Axis. Berlin, July 19, 1940. In front of the Reichstag, Hitler, once again, offered the peace to Great Britain. In our reality, the British refused the peace, continuing the war until victory, after 5 years of furious fights. But the price of the victory was enormous. The British had the economy destroyed. They lost the empire and the status of world power in favor of the USA. It was not a British interest to continue the war. What if Britain, in July 1940, accepts the German peace proposals? August 1940, United Kingdom accepts to start peace negotiations. Air raids over Britain are suspended. Ceasefire in Africa between British and Italians. The peace is signed in September 1940. Germany must withdraw from occupied countries. There must be a free Polish state. British must retire from Iceland. The status of Alsace and Lorraine will be discussed in bilateral talks between France and Germany. Pétain remains head of the state in France, waiting for future new elections. The Second World War is over. It lasted less than 1 year, with only around 90,000 military deaths and no wide destructions. Slowly, Europe returns to normality. But now, in the East, Soviets and Germans are face to face. Germans and Soviets are highly suspicious of the other's intentions. The Wehrmacht had obliterated the West in 6 weeks, and Stalin knows Hitler is always looking at East. Soviet Union of Stalin is aggressive too. In November 1939, they attacked Finland. Then, they invaded Bessarabia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Poland. Hitler fears Russia could attack Germany too. December 1940, Hitler issues directive to begin planning for the invasion of Russia. Meanwhile, in Asia, Japan and China are involved in a violent conflict. Japanese occupy part of China. This war creates tension between USA and Japan. Americans expanded the embargo to petrol too, creating enormous problems to Japanese. Berlin, February 1941. German High Command submits the plan of the invasion of Russia to Hitler. There will be 3 attack directions: Leningrad, Army Group North, von Leeb; Moscow, Army Group Center, von Bock; Stalingrad, Army Group South, von Rundstedt. 3 million men and 4,000 tanks will be involved. The invasion is set for May 15, 1941. The name will be Operation Barbarossa. Hitler accepts the plan. In May, there are political turmoil in Yugoslavia, and a wet winter kept rivers at full flood. Barbarossa operation is postponed until June 22, 1941. Wehrmacht is now ready. At 1 o'clock, Operation Barbarossa begins. The greatest invasion of history starts. But, this time, the two giants will fight alone. No Axis allies for Germany. No ally for Soviets. The Wehrmacht attack on the whole Eastern Front. Huge German encirclement of 300,000 Red Army troops near Białystok. The first part of Operation Barbarossa will be the same we all know. Lend-Lease, the Allied help to Soviets, was not important in 1941, so Soviets will have almost the same strength. Germany too will have almost the same strength. The impact of strategic bombing on Germany, until 1942, was very low. The Germans do not have at their side 800,000 Italians, Finnish, Hungarians, Slovaks, and Romanian. But they do not need to keep large forces in France and Scandinavia. July 1, 1941. Riga is taken. Panzers of Army Group North advance in Latvia. July 11, Germans cross the Dnieper. Guderian takes Minsk. The Luftwaffe is able to establish air superiority rather quickly. No Battle of Britain. All those squadrons of Messerschmitt 109 and FW 190 are now roaming in the eastern skies. The Soviets have more military aeroplanes than all the world combined over. But old biplanes, such as the I-15, still made up a significant portion of the Soviet Air Force, and the I-16 was a good, but not great counter, to Messerschmitt 109. July 15, Guderian cut off a Soviet concentration of 300,000 men, near Smolensk. The Germany's Osttheer, the Army of the East, easily encircle and smash the rarely well-equipped Red Army forces, because Soviets are stationing near the border in an offensive posture. Not because they want to attack Germany, but because they have just invaded Poland and Baltic states. Soviets have no prepared defenses in which to deploy. The Stalin Line was a myth. In 1941, the Red Army is still suffering from the officer corps purges of 1937-38. About 30,000 Red Army personnel were executed. Stalin, probably, was not so wrong to fear his generals. But now, Red Army have inexperienced commanders. August 3rd. In the south, Kleist and Stulpnagel seal off the Amman pocket. August 5th. Orel is taken. Moscow is now at 200 kilometers. In Asia too, there are winds of war. Part of Japanese military thinks to a military way to solve the problems with USA. They know it's not possible to defeat USA, but they hope to obtain a decisive naval victory, create a strong defensive line, and force USA to the peace table after a short conflict, as they did in 1905 against Imperial Russia. September 8, 1941, the siege of Leningrad begins. September 19, Kiev is surrounded. The Germans capture 665,000 POWs, the greatest encirclement of history. The encirclement of Kiev was an Hitler idea. Despite Allied propaganda, Hitler was a good strategist. Hitler's plan was to destroy Soviet field army, and go for industrial resources of the Soviet Union. Prestige targets like Moscow did not figure prominently in Hitler's planning. It was a fine plan. It did not work only because of USA Lend-Lease and mistakes on the battlefield. The Führer's death was a luck for German generals. This provided the opportunity to blame him for their incompetence. October 10, 1941. Germans encircle about 660,000 men, near Vyazma. October 24, Kharkov falls to the Germans. However, the invasion is beginning to bog down. The rains creates muddy roads, and immobilize German tanks. The citizens of Moscow frantically build fortifications for the coming siege. Leading the defense of Moscow is Zhukov. Stalin remains in Moscow. Red Army troop reinforcements arrive in Moscow from Siberia. Meanwhile, after the defeat, the British Empire is in turmoil. In India, Gandhi urges his followers to begin a passive resistance against British rule. October 18, Hitler and Mussolini meet at the Brenner Pass. Mussolini offers a contingent of voluntaries, as he did in Spain. Hitler refuses, as he refuses voluntaries from other European countries. He fears that a foreign help could turn the Germany-Russia conflict into a world war. Stalin too refuses the help offers. He is suspicious of foreign army, Americans and British first. Germans and Soviets want to fight alone. December 4, the German offensive around Moscow is at a complete halt. The temperature on the Moscow front falls to 37 degrees C. The German advance is stopped 30 kilometers from Moscow. Hitler ordered to go into winter quarters. Without a war in the West, Germans do not need a rapid victory. Moscow, at least for this winter, is unsafe. In the Far East, Japanese have an attack plan on Pearl Harbor ready. But, without a war in Europe, they would have to take on all of the American fleet, alone. Germany and Italy will not help them. Japan never was really part of Axis. The chaos Germany caused in Europe presented an opportunity to seize the southern resource area, while the European powers were distracted. But they never were ideological allies. And there is the risk that United Kingdom, led by one the worst warmonger of the last century, could join the game to distract the attention from the internal problems of the colonies. Japanese are not interested on Siberia, it's only an endless forest, full of bears. Japan Land Army is weak. A Japanese army was eviscerated by Red Army at Kalkingal in summer 1939, when the Red Army was itself weak. The Japanese have no real tanks, they are pouring most of their resources into the fleet and the aircraft production. Their best tank has a 57mm gun, that could damage a T-34 only at less than 400 meters. December 1941. Japan accepts the USA conditions. The Sino-Japanese War is over. 1942. In Russia, things start to diverge from our reality. In this situation, there is no Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease are the aids Allied gave Soviets. Here some numbers of the Lend-Lease. The Soviets received about 19% of military aircraft, 33% of the motor vehicles, 12% of tanks. Before Lend-Lease, Soviets still used flags to communicate from tank to tank. 100-octane aviation fuel helped Soviet aircraft to gain something close to parity in terms of performance against German fighters. The food was enough to feed 12 million men for the duration of the war. Without Lend-Lease, Soviets would have had to pull more men into their industry and farming. Lend-Lease came to roughly $12 billion. Soviets can still buy whatever they need, paying in gold. They have no credit. Promises to pay in the future are worthless if you are getting conquered. In 1941, Soviets had a stash of $2,800,000 worth of, enough to buy a fifth of the Lend-Lease they received. But it's improbable that Russia is willing to spend all of its hard currency and risk an economic collapse. This would mean that Soviets can't have anything like the historical amounts of material. We can estimate that Lend-Lease represented 15% of Soviet total production. On other side, Germans are now free to throw everything at Russia. There is no Allied air bombing. In 1942, Germany received 120 kilograms of bombs, each square kilometer. 50% of the Luftwaffe losses were in the West Front. German cities would simply be untouched by the war. The Soviets have very little in the way of strategic bombing. Germany do not have 1 million men tied up in anti-aircraft defense. 25% of German industry was used to produce anti-aircraft guns and ammunitions. Thousands of 88mm guns used on the anti-aircraft war are now in the east hitting T-34. With dedicated AP rounds, it could kill a T-34 at 2,500 meters. No British naval blockade. The Germans could just import the stuff they lack, oil first. Germany is surrounded by friendly countries. Netherlands, Belgium, and Switzerland too do not want a new neighbor, and happily sell weapons to Germany, since they are strictly going east. USA too never had problem to sell weapons to everybody willing to pay for them. German Navy easily blockades the port of Murmansk and the Arctic Ocean routes. Bismarck, not sunk as the battle never happens, Admiral Scheer, and Tirpitz are some of the best battleship of the world. Probably, Germans will have resources to finish their aircraft carrier, the Graf Zeppelin. Without the Royal Navy, there is no need to build over 1,000 U-boats, with a total cost of around $2,700,000. All those submarines are worth of 6,900 Tigers too. The Tiger tank costs around $400,000. This does not mean Germans will have 6,900 more Tigers too. With 6,900 Tigers, you could conquer the world. But the amount of resources freed by the end of the war in the West is enormous. Germany don't have to create the Atlantic Wall defenses. The greatest single resource drain, V2 program, with more than 3,000 missiles built, is cancelled. So, in 1942, we have a Soviet Union 15% weaker, and a Germany far stronger. In our reality, Germans were a heartbeat away from taking Moscow. In this situation, Wehrmacht could have the strength for a new attack to Moscow. In front of Moscow, Army Group Center assemble 18 panzer divisions, 10 motorized divisions, and 60 infantry divisions, a total of 2 million men, with 5,000 guns, 1,600 aircraft and 2,300 tanks. Zhukov deploys 7 armies. The vast human resources of the Soviet Empire has begun collecting on Moscow. But many units have little training and low morale. They lack everything, including food. April 1942. Germans are on the move. The objective is the Kremlin. This is the battle that will decide the war. The plan is: the 3rd and 4th Panzer Armies, 38 divisions, will attack from the north, while Guderian's 2nd Panzer, 14 divisions, has to drive toward Moscow from the south, and encircle it. The plan seems easy, but Bach knows its execution will be difficult. The Osttheer has a weakness, the logistic. They are able to supply less than half the Army Group Center's requirements of 30 trains per day over decrepit Russian roads. Horses are the main vehicle for transporting anything that rail could not provide. So almost everywhere, since the Soviets, as they retreat, destroy the few infrastructure they had. April 22, 24th Guderian's Panzer Corps, with 3 infantry divisions, take Tula, after 6 days. May 1st. At Kalinin, 5th Corps and 46th Panzer Corps, 6 divisions in all, rip open a hole between the 30th and 16th Armies. The 16th is forced to withdraw east, toward Istra, leaving a gap between the 2 armies, that Hoepner exploits. The 78th Rifle Division, newly arrived from Siberia, fight at Istra, against the SS Das Reich Division. Then fall back, on May 27th. But the 30th Army can't withdraw east. It's another pocket disaster. Germans take Kymki, less than 15 kilometers from Moscow. They see the gleaming onion domes of the Kremlin, in the distance. May 29th, Guderian sent his 24th Panzer Corps, northeast of Tula. Kluge Panzer Army cut the Tula-Moscow highway, on May 30th. Germans are dangerously low on fuel and ammunitions. They have sustained around 150,000 casualties, and lost over 700 tanks. Bach and Guderian have only one last attack left. And no one knows whether it will end inside, or outside the Kremlin walls. But for the Soviets, the situation is far worse. From March to June, the Red Army sustained roughly 1.5 million casualties. And now, it's considerably worn down. May 28, around Kolomna, Boldin's 50th Army is threatened with encirclement and withdrawal. Guderian's veterans strike out for Yegorevsk, taking it on June 2nd. Then attacks toward Orkovo, on June 4th. In the north, Bach is ready to attack once again. The 3rd and 4th Panzer Armies have received enough fuel and ammunition and turn on the Soviet. In 2 days, they capture Krasnoyarsk, opening the northern door to Moscow. Vasilov's army collapses entirely. Soviets throw whatever reserves they could find to halt the 3rd Panzer Army, but these unlucky units are driven back, with heavy losses. June 6, Zhukov orders to retreat east. On the morning of June 7, Guderian panzers link up west of Noginsk, with Hoepner's 4th Panzer Army. Moscow is encircled. 13 September 1942, the Battle of Stalingrad begins. And rapidly becomes a bloody battle, in which you can't surrender. Soviet Union is not a signatory to Geneva Conventions. Germany is a signatory, but has no obligation to provide the benefits to a non-member. Hitler's legions are now at the gates of the 3 major Soviet cities, but Germans are too far from their supply lines to push any further. The siege of Moscow could last years, as Leningrad siege. Soviet factories has been moved beyond Urals. The Luftwaffe cannot reach them. The Luftwaffe only has medium bombers, 2 engines, as Heinkel 111, and Dornier 217. The Germans did test heavy bombers, like the He 177, and the Ju 390, that can reach New York, but it would need years to become a real threat. The importance of the partisan movement in Russia, as in all country, is totally exaggerated, probably to save the national honor. But the conquered territory needs soldiers to survey it. In Russia, the situation is becoming like the Japan mess in China, with a guerrilla warfare that would continue for decades. But Soviets are too weak to push Germans back. 6 million of Soviet soldiers had been killed, captured, or deserted. They have lost 40% of the cultivated lands. Russia has more manpower reserves than Germany. But large armies with no food, no ammunitions, and no fuel cannot fight. Only the fear of Germans keep Red Army fighting. Communist Party has an iron grip on the population. But this is almost the same situation Russia had during World War I, before Bolshevik Revolution. Stalin knows people is on the edge of the revolt. October 16, 1942. Stalin sends a delegation to Germans, asking to start peace tractatives. Hitler accepts. He believed he could win, but the cost would be enormous. And for what? He never was interested, on the whole Russia. The peace tractatives are held in Yalta, Molotov for the Soviets and Goering for the Germans, while furious fighting continues, near Stalingrad. November 10, 1942. Russians accept most of German peace conditions. Free Baltic states and Ukraine, under German influence. Demilitarized zone, until the gates of Moscow. Payment of reparations. The most ferocious war of history is over. After the end of hostilities, the situation in Russia becomes chaotic. There are riots against communism. People is angry for the defeat, for the millions of death, for the famine. Stalin is in a very hard situation. He always was more afraid of his generals than of Hitler's. Stalin is suspicious of Zhukov's popularity. In 1941, Stalin warned Zhukov that he would face a firing squad if German jackboots touched Moscow's streets. He keeps his promise. December 3, 1942, Zhukov is executed. This will be the last error of Stalin. Red Army generals fear the restart of the 1937 purges. 2 days after Zhukov's execution, a military coup overthrown Stalin. Timoshenko, Shapashnikov, Konev, Shvernik, Rokossovsky, and Khrushchev are part of the GULP. The provisional government places Stalin and 2 of his sons, Vasilij and Svetlana, under house arrests at Kubyshev. Immediately after that, the Second Russian Civil War starts. There are many factions fighting each other. The 2 largest combatant groups are the provisional government of Khrushchev and the forces loyal to Stalin, led by Lavrenti Beria. In addition, rival armies fought against both. Separatists, Cossacks, Kalmucks, Kazakhs, Uzbeks, pro-German armies, anti-communist movements. Japan, Britain, and USA intervene in the war, vied to determine Russia's political future. Stalin and his sons are executed during 1943. The Civil War ends in 1946, with Khrushchev Army's victory. And this is the new Europe.
This is what, in my opinion, would have happened in this situation. In 1941, no one country could face Germany alone. However, the Soviets were the only one who could fight head-to-head with the Germans. In the following years, Japan fell under American influence as today. After plebiscite, Elsass-Lothringen is split between France and Germany. In 1943, Luxembourg is formally annexed to Germany. There are international protests, but nothing more. There will not be another Poland. Petain loses the elections in 1949 and goes into a voluntary exile in Switzerland. The USA becomes the first world power. They are the only country who come out from the war on a better footing than it entered. USA tested the first nuke in 1947, Germany in 1948, Russia in 1951. A war is now impossible. In 1951, Hitler proposes the Axis Union, an union of free European states with no economic barriers. Various countries will join Axis during the years. Hitler and Mussolini will die the same year, 1964. Then Germany and Italy will slowly return to democracy, as happened to Spain of Franco. Without the losses of the war, Britain will maintain the colonies. Along the British Empire, all European colonialism will last longer. So probably Africa and Middle East will be better places. Thank you for watching.